This Huawei decision, look, it's been on the cards for a while for the United Kingdom, but the timing and really how far they're willing to go does show that they're really serious about this.
Well, this is a costly decision for the UK to make. It will set back their transition to the 5G network by at least a year and obviously be very expensive, but it's the right decision to make. The consequences for them of not being able to guarantee the security of the hub of their telecommunications network that through which all their government and sensitive information passes would have been significant, and also the consequences for them in terms of potential loss of intelligence sharing with the United States and other Five Eyes partners. So a difficult decision to make, but at the end of the day, the right one.
Do you think it's going to put global pressure on? We saw Donald Trump today singling out again, saying that China has been the cause of the pandemic. This certainly isn't new from him, but it does show he's not easing off on that rhetoric either.
No, I mean, in some ways, this was an inevitable consequence. I mean, Eric Schmidt, one of the founders of Google, wrote 7 years ago about the fact that the digital world would become balkanized because of the differences between China and the US. You can't use China, US apps, digital apps or technology in China, and there's a lot of limitations on US and other allied providers putting their systems into China. Now we're starting to see a degree of reciprocity coming from the US and its allies in terms of whether it's Huawei or whether it's concerns about the prevalence of apps like TikTok. So this is a natural consequence of the distinction between the US and Chinese systems. We are starting to see in the US a coordinated messaging campaign on China. Secretary Pompeo's remarks on the South China Sea yesterday, Robert O'Brien, the National Security Advisor's speech on China several weeks ago, and we're expecting a speech from the FBI director on China shortly as well. So we're starting to see a coordinated campaign to establish the differences between China and to set boundaries between the US and China.
I'm glad you raised the Pompeo remarks on the South China Sea because that's so important to Australia specifically. We are really in quite a tricky position with where we are geographically, but we've also seen an increase in presence from both the United Kingdom and the US in our region. Do you think there is increased tension in the South China Sea?
Look, I don't think Secretary Pompeo's remarks increased the tensions. The tensions were already there and have been there since the 2016 tribunal ruling on what China is doing in the South China Sea. The tensions are there when Chinese ships ram other ships, and the tensions are there when President Xi Jinping broke the promise he made to President Obama on the White House lawn that he would never militarise those islands. Well, they've now been well and truly militarised. So I see Secretary Pompeo really as just stating the facts. He's trying to do some signalling to US partners and allies in the region that the US is aware of this, that they will take a more consistent and strong line on operations and activities in the South China Sea. But it's really 4 years late. We needed to see this from the Obama administration. We didn't. It's good that it's happening now, but it would have been better 4 years ago.
If we look at how things are playing out domestically in the United States, we've had some tension just between President Trump and Dr. Fauci, who's been leading the Centre for Disease Control response to the coronavirus pandemic. You can't say much good about how they've been handling the pandemic in the US so far. Do you think Dr. Fauci, though, has really held his nerve dealing with the president?
Look, I think he has. The president saying, I don't always agree with what Fauci says, but he's a very nice guy. The strange thing this week was somebody in the White House put together a list of things that Dr. Fauci had said over time that had proved to be wrong. It's effectively a piece of opposition research on one of their own figures at a time when he's providing such an important role for the nation. It's a very strange thing to do. It points to the way this White House works. When you're out of favour, you're out of favour. And I think they acknowledge that Fauci is important, but they're starting to get annoyed with the fact that he sometimes cuts across the president's remarks. Having said that, we saw the president this week out in a mask for the first time after months of being urged by Fauci and others to do that. So he is having some impact. And I think he is doing his job as an official, speaking to the objective truth and not being swayed by the politics of coronavirus, which has become such a partisan issue in the US.
And you're right, that was just so symbolic after we'd seen so many months of Joe Biden wearing face masks when he was going out in public. Weeks, we should say, actually. He spent more months in his basement in his house. But when you look at the polls, how is this all playing out for Donald Trump, do you think?
Well, the polls aren't good for him at the moment. I mean, the polls have been unreliable. The betting markets are perhaps more reliable, and they clearly see that if the election was held today, Joe Biden would win. by some margin. The challenge for the president is he's not increasing the groups that support him. There will be people that will support him in November no matter what, because they're worried that Joe Biden is going to destroy the economy by moving to the left and trying to redistribute too much wealth through taxes, or that his Green New Deal schemes will end up being white elephants, or that he will be too focused on identity politics and political correctness. Those people will always vote for President Trump. But he is starting to lose support amongst groups that did support him in 2016. What's changed? Well, Joe Biden is objectively a more likeable candidate than Hillary Clinton was. And also people have had the chance to see how the president actually performs. There was hope that he would be able to achieve the unachievable in 2016 when he was elected. Now they've seen that the president often struggles to execute his policies and is a very unstable leader. So long way to go yet, but you would think if we did it today, Joe Biden would end up being the president.
What do you think President Trump could do to turn his fortunes around?
Well, he's got to be pretty. For him, he's got to be able to execute. He could change his tone and style, but I don't think he's going to do that. He's not going to stop tweeting. The sort of way the dynamics of the White House aren't going to change. He could bring in new people around him. He's done that frequently. There's some discussion at the moment about whether he should take a new vice presidential candidate to the convention. I don't think that's going to happen, but there's been some analysis of whether that would improve his fortunes or not. For him, really, it's about showing that he is stable and showing that he is able to map out a long-term position for the United States, or finding another issue that could charge up his supporters and motivate some bipartisan support. Now, China could be one of those issues. We could see the president take a much more ideological narrative against China, and that could yield him some electoral gains.
And you can tell an election's really on the cards now because, well, more than on the cards. An election's on the way because there's this renewed push to get President Trump to release his tax returns. Do you think we'll ever see them?
Look, we probably will, but it'll be long after he's stopped being president. But the Supreme Court has essentially pushed back on the argument that he doesn't have to release those tax returns. I mean, it's very unlike the Australian political system, but it's very much expected in the United States. If you're running for a national office, the public gets to pore over every aspect of your life, including your tax returns. Of course, the biggest risk to the president is that releasing his tax returns would show that he's not quite the successful billionaire he's held himself out to be, that he, in fact, has been losing money over the years, but I don't think we'll know that until long after the election.
And just finally, sticking with domestic US politics, Jeff Sessions in the Senate has run there. All eyes are on this race.
Look, it's a pretty interesting race. You'd think that Jeff Sessions, 20 years in the Senate, lifelong Republican, former Attorney General, would be in the box seat to win this primary that's just closing now. But he's looking vulnerable. He's got a popular opponent up against him, and he's got the president tweeting against him and making considerable remarks about how terrible he was in the White House because he recused himself from the Mueller investigation. So we'll find out shortly whether he wins or not, and then he's got to go on to face his Democrat opponent later in the year. But quite an extraordinary race to be watching.